In this lesson, we'll take our theory on subframing and perspective and see how we can utilize this on our photo walk. So we've discussed subframing a bit, and it's something that I really love to try and look for when I'm out taking pictures. It can be just quite fun to see how they occur in the day-to-day. There could be like a window itself in a shop. It could be a doorway. It could simply be a gap between two buses as they're driving down the street. They occur all the time, and I think they're a really powerful compositional tool to use in street photography, and I really love trying to include these. They add depth, they add visual interest. They again help you focus in on a focal point in the image. Subframes are always something I look for, and I encourage people to just keep an eye out for them on the day-to-day as you're walking around. You'll notice them occurring all the time. Something else to consider with subframing is, for me, I don't think it necessarily has to be like a rigid geometric shape, like a square or a rectangle. In this picture, for example, when we have this puddle behind the two guys on the bench, the puddle itself is almost like a miniature frame on the ground, framing the people on the bench. Any kind of frame within a frame like this, I consider to be a subframe. And I just think it's a powerful tool, again, to keep you looking at an image for longer. So I also like to think about perspective when I'm out taking street photographs on my phone, and I like to position myself in a way that I can emphasize or kind of exaggerate elements in the foreground or the background. Sometimes I like to have fun making pictures where like a pigeon is gigantic. When we were walking along Regent's Canal, I found this nice doorway with these lovely sunflowers growing in front of it. And the door had this nice sticker on it saying, "Peace is not just for Christmas." And we had these lovely leading lines as well of this metal grid on the door. So I positioned myself where we had the actual sunflower in the foreground, making it much bigger than it actually is, so playing around with perspective. And then utilizing the subframe of the metal grid on the door to kind of frame this little sticker on the doorway. And then we also have the leading lines of the grid itself, drawing your eye into this sticker and creating that as a focal point. There's not a particularly huge amount going on in this photograph. I guess it is literally just a doorway and some flowers, but we have an example of perspective with the flower. We have the leading lines of the grid. And then we actually have the grid acting as a subframe around the sticker itself. And then I also really love the red tone of the door and the yellow tone of the flowers and the green of the actual plant itself. So this really fits into the kind of color palette that I like to keep in mind when I'm out taking photographs. And then also, I just love to include any reds and yellows when I'm out and about taking pictures in London. That kind of fits into my overall kind of primary color idea that I always have in the back of my mind. So this one is quite a successful one for me. It kind of hits a few nails on the head, so to speak. So with this overall color palette, I think I have included these kind of warmer tones. So we have the orange detailed shot of the doorway, this red door, and then we have the street scene with the Netflix posters. We've got the red of the Netflix logo and the yellow of the lines across the floor. I mean, don't spend too long worrying about the color scheme, but it is definitely something to have in the back of your mind and maybe start thinking about how you can use it to tie your final project together. So in terms of thinking about these color schemes or color palettes, you might also want to start thinking about a meaning that ties them together. It might be regularly occurring sort of like building material, like a kind of sandstone or a brick or a concrete that you want to include. That might create a more kind of impactful, maybe a sort of somber mood. You might want to include some brighter colors, some pastels, and have a more light-hearted mood. You might have been out taking pictures on a nice sunny day when the sky was blue, so you have this nice blue tones occurring through your scene. Something to consider when photographing subframes, particularly on your phone, is choosing the focal point. So you can see when I was taking this picture, the phone kept trying to focus on the leaves of the flowers, so I had to kind of manually select that I wanted to focus on the sticker on the door. So that's always something to keep in mind. I really do often like to kind of hold down the focal point and lock it on an area so I can try different compositions and positions easily. So again, this is quite easy to do on your phone, but just keep that in mind, because I think often mobile phones will naturally jump to focus on the closest thing. And when you are trying to play with perspective and depth, you will most likely want to focus on something in the background rather than the foreground. It can also be fun to play around with perspective when using the super wide angle lens on your phone. If you have one on your phone, you can really exaggerate tall buildings, people, maybe people walking past it as well. It really kind of exaggerates their shoes and their legs. So it's just quite a fun thing to keep in mind when messing around with perspective. It doesn't necessarily have to be a tight angle like I've used here. You can go super wide and see the impact that has as well. I think experimenting with perspective in this way also leads back to our thoughts about making a photograph a bit more abstract. When you are adding elements in the foreground like this and changing their perspective and the way they look, it can be a powerful tool to have the viewer asking more questions about where the image is, what's going on, how you achieved this look. So that's also something just to keep in mind when thinking about perspective and how you can maybe use this in combination with subframes to build a more abstract yet visually interesting mobile phone photograph. So there we have it. I've taken all the photographs on my photo walk. In the next lesson, I'm going to gather all my photographs together and start making a critical selection.